Nathan Buckley is here. Hello to you, Bucks.
Good morning, Jared. How are you?
I'm well.
Excellent.
I'm well. Shall we?
Bit of a quieter weekend. Like 2 games is great, especially when you get them in the doses that we got them. But 2 standout performances by 2 hardened finals teams, or potentially hardened finals teams. Looks like the Hawks are going to be a little bit to handle.
Let's go deep then, shall we? The buck stops for Victoria Police made for more search police careers.
Yeah, for me, it's a little bit about finals football versus home and away. So what is it? What are the reasons that some teams can stand up? And obviously we've highlighted, looking at the preliminary finalists of this weekend and how consistently Collingwood get around, how consistently the Lions and the Cats do. Finals football, the foundations are the basics of the game. So pressure is key. And even if you dig deeper than that, it's can you stick your tackles or can you beat the tackle that is attempted to be stuck? So Cam Rayner's performance, through the middle of the ground, he's just an absolute wrecking ball, but they go back the other way, say they do, then they're significant contests to win. So that's how big that is, and the big bodies definitely help. Contests, so pressure's key and sticking your tackles. Contests, whoever's harder and cleaner inside. And part of that is not losing your head. You can get caught up in the moment. You can get ahead of, I think, okay, where is this ball going to go after I've been clean enough to pick it up? And then you're not clean enough to pick it up because you're thinking about where the potential exits are. So you need to be harder and cleaner. It's a ground ball war, and we've seen every team that's won that win the game. And then it's basically basics done well. So system for me, and system broken down to its DNA is 2v1s. So trying to create as many outnumbered situations as you can, and how do you handle those? And that needs to be drilled. It needs to be executed so you can handle the pressure. When you have the ball, can you draw a player to put another player in space? When you are the one, can you delay enough to get another teammate to come in and make it a 2v2 and turn that ball over right there, right then? So that's the basic of the game. The turnover or contest or everything, can you get it back and do that better than the opposition? And I think we can safely say that Hawthorn looked really clean. They looked like they could find time and space where Adelaide couldn't. And so the Lions did against the Suns. So pressure's key, contest, the big bodies help, and the basics done well is what the finals teams display.
And now 4. So that's the buck stops, looking for a great career that gives you more search police careers. Victoria Police made for more. The big issue are the 4 that we have left. They're monstrous preliminary finals. They're teams who know how to be successful. There hasn't been a preliminary final weekend without one of them since 2006. They share 14 of the past 24 premierships. So if our competition has a divide, it's those who know how to be successful and those that don't. And these 4 know how to be successful. The big issue for Oldham construction lawyers, you're experts in construction law.
Well, there's no doubt that over a short period of time, if you've got a hardened, experienced team that has been there and done that in finals, then they're very likely to be able to come back around. Cats are probably a little bit of a different one in the fact that their current team looks quite different to their premiership team. But you're right about the organisations that we're talking about and how over a long period of time, that there's far more than, what do we think a cycle is in football these days? What would you say? How many years, how many seasons is a cycle?
4 to 5?
Yeah, I think, and so Richmond went hard and won 3 out of their 4 and were thereabouts either side of it. Brisbane obviously went and won 3 out of their 4, and like in the early 2000s, and were thereabouts either side of it. But they made hay while the sun shone. So we at the moment we have a Collingwood team that have been thereabouts for 7 or 8 years with a drop off in between. And we've seen a Lions team that have grown and come hard, and they've been able to push up, and they still look like they've got a lot in them given their youth and the experience that they're getting winning finals. And Geelong are just keep coming around. So I think there's no doubt that you can't be challenged, or you can't sort of. It's undeniable how often they come around, and their supporters would be wrapped. The supporters that aren't there, they'd be a little bit disappointed.
So what do you think of our matchups? Now, we won't get too deep here because that's Wednesday's material, but they are tantalising, aren't they?
They are, and I thought Brisbane would only really have the one punch left in them. They were pretty banged up, and there was a lot of negativity surrounding their qualifying final loss, and they've done a fantastic job. They didn't look like they were running out of steam. They look like they're charged and ready to throw a few more punches yet. So I think Brisbane, for all that they've lost out of last year, Danaher obviously being the big one, Neil they'll miss, but they've just been able to find a way. I think that game is going to be sensational. I've got that as close to a 50-50 as you can get, and the Geelong Hawthorn, we've been around there before, haven't we? It's going to be fascinating, and the Hawks are up and going. They're the ones with momentum, but so too a Geelong. You couldn't have asked more from them. The way they finished off the year against lesser teams, and then the way they faced, one of the most hardened teams in Brisbane at the back end of the year.
Is there any part of it that's problematic for a competition that's desperate for equalisation? That there are 4, and then if you included Sydney in that, you'd stretch it to 5. Richmond have to show that they can do it in a second wave. They dominated one wave, and will they rise again quickly as Hawthorn has done? Is it at all problematic?
No, I don't believe so. I think the straight sets exits would suggest that the gap between the top 4 and the bottom 4 once you get to finals is less, given what we've seen. Now, whether the pre-finals bye has a part to play in that, I'm not sure. But no, I don't mind it. I mean, if we've got a club that's coming from 8th to go and contend, well then so be it. We've had a team in 9th that finished in 9th that we thought could do some damage when it got to September. There is the haves and the have-nots at the moment, but I think that's the challenge of other clubs. You've got to raise the bar. There's so many decisions that you need to get right. There's through the administration, how you recruit, how you list manage, how well that feeds into what the coaches want, from how they want to play the game, how far forward you look, and then getting all of those efficiencies along that process and in that pathway is what lends to elite performance when it matters. Culture matters. And there are clubs that get that right, and there are clubs that just don't quite get that right, which is why we don't see, or why we see Essendon in the situation that they're in, or Melbourne or Carlton, relatively often. So that is a reality, and I don't think it's all personnel. I don't think it's all on field. I don't think it's all coaching. I don't think it's all recruiting or list management or conditioning, but it's all of them as well.
Yeah, the whole of club exercise, I think, is what is illuminated here, and maybe Hawthorn ends up being the best example of it. Is they pride themselves on winning premierships every decade. They retool themselves. They spend 5 years out of the finals. They come back in, and in the second year they're back in a prelim and building towards something, whether it's now or whether it's in the next little bit. While there are clubs who jolt from one rebuild to the next rebuild, have flashes up and then back down. The whole of club exercise. If you're involved in a club that is perennially unsuccessful with moments, that would be the study. It's not new, but it's inescapable with where we are.
But there always needs to be change, even at the top. Like the clubs that are at the top now, they have changed, they've evolved, and they have made tough decisions and let things go. But in what doses and where is the real question. So decision making is where it comes down to across the whole challenge of building a football club, not just a team, but of a football club, of which the team is a representation at the pointy end when you get to the tip of the iceberg on weekends, through home and away, and then, as we've seen with Adelaide, that the tip of the iceberg when you get to finals, does it stand up there? So you're spot on, but the reason why we see more change for sides that aren't there is because they've got less of it locked away. They've got less of it right. So, yes, we expect change from those teams to try and be better, but sometimes there's a right level of change. You can be too much or too little.
Yep. And that's part of what Adelaide is going to have to face now, which is what represents proportional change and the right response.
And Adelaide have been able to build really well. But so now the challenge is, so you come back around from 17. They've been building this list. They've been building this style. They've been building their capacity to reach this point, and they fell well short. I mean, the question is, so who spins out of this season better? Adelaide, who finished minor premier with 18 wins, or the Suns? I mean, definitely there's more optimism around the Suns. They feel like they've achieved more, even though Adelaide come back to finals for the first time, but they just weren't able to fire a shot.
Just thought the best bits were probably the individuals and a few of the performances. So maybe let's pick 4 of them, shall we? And start with Jack Gunston, Bucks.
Well, that was he had great supply, so you can't say that. That if he was down the other end, it would have been a little bit harder. But the fact is that Hawthorn's slick ball use and their really strong clearance work, especially early, gave him really good supply. And then he watching him off ball behind, so outside the broadcast arc, you wouldn't see it on the TV as such, but his work rate is through the roof. So he comes off with a sore hammy, but he showed and apparently went in tight, but he showed no signs of that. His movement was constant. It was like he would put 3 or 4 leads if it was a congested forward 50. And a play, I think it was Impey who had the ball about 65 metres out with time, sat on it for a little bit, and Gunston was working Keane over, flat out. He found that skinny side hit up 4 or 5 times. I think it was in the third quarter. He was exceptional, and his finishing's been great. Just a part of an offensive structure that works really well, and he's reprising his best football and more.
1 forward, 1 defender. Harris Andrews, about 10 minutes in. Ben King looks like he's going to kick 8. The Gardner matchup is the wrong matchup. The Lions love him as their intercept defender. Just go and lock away the danger forward, and King touches it twice for the rest of the night and got so comprehensively beaten down. He kicked 71 goals for the season, Ben King. By the end of it, he looked like he'd never played. Harris Andrews beat him so badly. What a performance by the co-captain.
And he's playing the best football of his career as well. Once again, helps when you've got really fierce pressure on the ball, and it makes and you don't allow the opposition to get time and space through the midfield to be able to give their best users an extra step or two to let Ben King go to work and then work Harris Andrews in a space that he's not comfortable, which is in open space with a bit of movement. But he knows how to cut the angles. One way back when sort of played full forward for 5 minutes on Chris Langford, and just remember thinking, I've got this bloke covered absolutely. Like, he's old, he can't move. Like, I'll get him on a hit up. I don't reckon I had any chance of even seeing a 5-yard bit of space that I could receive the ball, because he just kept positioning himself so well in front of me. And when I looked up, I'll be watching the ball, look up and think, there's my lead option. His body's already there. So that's what I think Harris Andrews does. He plays a little bit in front. He takes away the leading lanes, which stops players from taking him out of his preferred area. So he drags them into his one wood. And that's aerial contests and a bit of a wrestle, and he's able to draw his players into that through his positioning, and then he beats them up in that regard. So it was a supreme performance.
And then 2 midfielders, Jai Newcombe and Will Ashcroft, who both set the tone for their teams. Newcombe's first quarter was amazing, and Will Ashcroft's he's had good games, including winning a Norma Smith. I reckon this was even better.
Well, that's 4 finals now, and for Newcombe, and every final he's been the highest rated player on the field, and it wasn't even close. If you just look at a term of percentage, he was rated at 26, and Lloyd Meek was second with an 18. So 26, 18, 17, 15, 15, 14. So that shows you how elite he was in comparison. Same ratings, and that's all about where you win the ball, so contest, and how you use it. And I don't reckon there was many that are doing it better than him.
The pressure index will be Adelaide. Preliminary final integrity will be Hawthorn. Hawks have been in this category routinely throughout the year. They were the hot hand through the first handful of games. They were early premiership favourites. They went through a more difficult period, but they have been massing for a little while. This is not a surprise, as they are the 8th ranked team, so they're making their own history on that front, only the second team to do this in 32 years. But no one could sit here and say they are surprised. There is a whole lot in their game which makes sense and is now sharply tuned.
Yeah, I think it's worth sort of getting in the helicopter and looking big picture before you sort of come back to what they were able to do on the weekend, or even what they've been able to do in the first couple of weeks of finals. They have done remarkably well given the momentum that they carried through the back end of last year. Only done by a kick in the semi-final, and obviously everyone thought that if they weren't stopped there, they were always going to take some stopping, and they were a Sicily, stab pass from being able, because he covered that distance really easy, from being able to get through that game, and then who knows. But that has set them up and hardened them for what we're seeing right now. So to get back to the same venue 12 months later and to start the way they started and to impose themselves the way they've imposed themselves was fantastic. But I think the job that they've done cannot be underestimated. The challenge, they were able to do what they did last year with no expectation. And then all of a sudden the expectation comes on. And I spoke about it during the year. That was going to be the toughest challenge, and they've handled it. Like, they won games early in the season without playing really well, and they did it with real grit. It wasn't about their skill and class. The balance of those, the grit and the class, we're seeing that at the moment, aren't we? We're seeing that, but they're so slick in and around this hardness inside. We saw hardness inside, but we didn't see the slickness early. But they were able to not beat themselves. Yep, see the big picture. Sam Mitchell's guided them really well. The leadership has been able to focus on what they do really well, and they're playing their best football now. Super impressive for that club to come together, for the team, the coaches and players, staff, to be able to come together to be in the shape that they're in at the moment. No Will Day. And for we were using stats with Will Day, without Will Day through the year. We're not as worried about that at the moment. But then he's obviously got a part to play in his leadership, preparing his troops as much as he possibly can. But good clubs, as we were saying, good clubs make good decisions more often than not, and they don't beat themselves. And Hawthorn have been able to come around, and they should be. They should be at the start of whatever is going to happen in the next 5 years, because they're in great shape.
The defensive 7 that they have. So they bring in Barrass and Battle, and you can see exactly why. Battle's already All-Australian and Barrass across 2 weeks. Sicily and Scrimshaw, and you can add Hardwick to that. Not only do they do the hard thing at the hard moment, they intercept at will, and then Amon and Impey are as damaging as anyone coming off half-back. So this is so bankable, as well as everything else that's going on in this game. You just feel so confident in that 7 and the way that they're setting up. And we saw it last week when they had to defend, 72 inside 50s, and they rendered a high-scoring team completely impotent on Friday night.
They run so hard and they're so efficient, both in defence and in offence. But even in those tools, they've found a way to fit them all in. And the way that they've done is Barrass he's the big hooer. Like, he's on the big forward. He's intercept marking. He's killing contests long down the line. He's so hard to move off the ball. Even when a small tries to block him, he steamrolls them and gets to the contest. So, but outside of that, Battle, Sicily, Scrimshaw, and then Weddle, we put in there.
Yes,
like, they can.
He's everything, isn't he?
They're 191 to 194. Like, they're 6'4", 6'5"ers that can win and defend a Rochelle or a smaller player like a Myers this week. It can defend a Myers or a Close just as much as they can lean in on a Shannon Neal. So that's a pretty dynamic thing to have. So it's challenging our views of what a tall and a small is, because they're just defenders, and they can intercept mark, and they can compete in the air, and they are clean at ground level, and they can use the ball well. So they've put together like a wealth of players that are just play the game really well, and then together they're a really good unit. Down the other end, they're tall. Like we thought Gunston, Lewis, Child Deer, like 4 talls. They're not really, because outside of Lewis, Gunston can go to ground and play ground level. Chol has shown elements of being able to, be smart enough around the contest to set his teammates up. So they're not one-dimensional. And Lewis is the one that sort of doesn't move around quite as well, doesn't give you anything at ground level, and needs to be there for long down the line. His spot will be interesting to see what they do with that if Deers becomes available. But they are big. They're a big side, but they don't want for any ground level cover.
You want to run the Crows postmortem.
Well, I think just to understand the situation that they found themselves in, so to not win a quarter out of those 8 is quite significant. So there were 6. They were the 6th team to lose in straight sets in the last 5 years. GWS last year went out in straight sets twice when they looked like they were up against Sydney and Brisbane, but they won 5 of those quarters in those 2 games. The worst result outside of that was in 23. Port Adelaide only won 2 of their quarters as they went out in straight sets. Apart from that, Brisbane 3 in 21, Melbourne 3 of their 8 in 22, and Melbourne in 23 they won. They were 4 and 4. So 0 and 8 is, like, I know that's not something, that's not a ladder we look at. It's not a stat that you look at, but it stands out. It probably highlights how far the Crows fell from their best footy. They've got a lot of questions to ask, because their players will be stung by that, and so they should be. Not enough of them were able to stand up and handle the heat. And Collingwood and Hawthorn put fierce heat and pressure on you, whether it's in the contest or whether it's with their ball use, in Hawthorn's case, or both. They just weren't able. Too many of their players fell short of their best footy. Their guns didn't play well. And I think that their system seemed to fall away. And they didn't do the basics well. You've got to be clean. You're clean at ground level. Give yourself a chance to find time and space to go inside 50 with any surety and with any expectation of being able to connect. And they just weren't able to do that.
So what to do with that feedback, as Matthew Nix described it, is they do have a couple of list gaps, which they weren't. It's not sudden that they were there, but it was rather glaring once we got to the finals. What's missing?
Well, finals is all about contest, and they got beaten up there. But what we saw increasingly throughout the year was, especially in the back half of the year, is they were still scoring and winning, just going straight down the line. And Hinge was trying to change the angles a little bit at the early stages of this game. Miller wasn't quite as impactful as they'd like him to be. They don't have a lot of. They don't move into the mode of run and carry. They don't have a lot of run from behind. And if they do have it, they don't look for it. So they're just so happy to take the contest down the line. And if you don't win that, if you've got a team that has the attributes to be able to defend that, well, then you're pretty much impotent, which is what we saw. So they need to develop another layer where there's introduce a little bit more risk in their game, where they change the angle a little bit more, where they're prepared to chain up and use the run and find some run. And that might be personnel across halfback. Maybe add, change your role, or see if you can find an Impey-like figure that can play off halfback and give you some run. Because they became quite predictable, and they were very good at that, winning that predictability through the home and away. But it was their Achilles heel in the finals.
The pressure index for Adelaide, New Vision Clinics, Keyhole Laser Vision, new generation technology. There's a decision to be made around Taylor Walker. Text for himself as a starting point, and then Adelaide he's through the 300 games. He's a favourite son, but they have to answer the question: is he at the end?
Yeah, I think did Matty Nix say that? They haven't addressed that, and this probably is something that Tex has to answer for himself. And I think that it sounds like the club will give him that opportunity to consider what he wants to do. From what I can gather, the leadership that he displays in and around the locker room has been really strong. So that's got to be part of the consideration for Adelaide. Maybe he needs to be okay with playing 12, 15 games through the home and away, and then proving whether he's in their best 23 come finals, because that's probably what he has to face.
And they got that wrong, is it does bring into sharp focus the Isaac Rankin episode, and you can sort of pinpoint when things go south from there, which is Not tremendously surprising when it's your second best player that it happens to. And then I think there's all sorts of questions that they should ask themselves looking back.
Yeah, there's two elements, isn't it? There's the on-field impact and then there's the off-field or environmental impact. And I would suggest that the second one was as profound as the first. He's a difference maker. He makes things happen on field, and they did miss that. And it's the domino effect of who the best small defender goes to as well. So he goes to players that haven't had, like when Rankin's around, that okay, well Hardwick's over there. He's got his hands full and he's busy trying to defend one of the most damaging and dangerous players in the competition. You take that out and there's a trickle down effect. Same for Will Day with Hawthorn though, and they just. So does it mean that Adelaide's style relied too much on guys on their class to be able to come and finish, that there wasn't enough system to find easier scoring opportunities or to defend well enough to create, to spread the load? That's a question that they'll have to ask themselves.
They are the unanswerable questions. How will this campaign serve them next?
Really well. And I think that he went on to say in his press conference that he believes that his team is built for September, and that's whether they are or they aren't. That's the best way to go about it, to remind them that of what's required and to continue to build their capacity around that. They were beaten up by the Lions early, and it's so interesting how those contests have taken place throughout the year. Like Lions win easily early, Suns win easily late, and then like to get that matchup in a semi-final in an elimination game was next level. So that was an excellent event for Queensland football, but also for the Suns to be able to see where they stacked up. It's reinforcing for the Lions. But no, they were beaten up in and around clearances where the Suns have been so strong. So they were down by 18, so 43-25 to the Lions through clearances, which just gave them more supply inside 50. It wasn't a high pressure game. Once the ball came out of the stoppage situation, it was actually quite open.
Yeah.
And that's because the ballistic nature of the players that won contests in open space. It was in a contest and it was won and gone. There wasn't time for the congestion to form, and that was really attacking football from the Lions, and the Suns were trying to do the same. So ultimately, the Lions won in their defensive 50 and they won in their forward 50 and gave themselves more supply through stoppage. So there's really significant elements of the game, and the Suns were well beaten as a result.
And they were the team that it was pretty evident once they got punched in the nose that they didn't have the legs. Is that they laid it all out there in Perth and they got the greatest moment in the club's history and they kicked the first 2 goals and you're going, is this on? And then as soon as the Lions got hold of them, they were gassed.
Did you think that was the way it was going to go? Because the Lions were the side that was seen as having a banged up group and maybe being shown up the week before. But how often have we seen this year where the side that's been flogged the week before just galvanises, finds a way, creates an edge? They become the hunter rather than the hunted. And I think that's a big element of the pointy end games. How do you hunt the opposition? We saw the Cats do it to the Lions, and now we saw the Lions do it to the Suns, and we'll go through the Dunkley-Rowell matchup. But you can't discount circumstance too. So you qualify 7th, you go and win an away final in Perth, and you fly back from Perth. We were only talking last week about the legs of coming back from that, and then straight into It's that just shows you how difficult it is for Perth teams, as much as for a Brisbane team, but for a Queensland team, but for a Perth team, the travel element. We were saying, so why are clubs perennially in contention? Well, not everyone has to deal with the travel either that the Perth teams do. But I think the Suns would have felt that a little bit, and it's no surprise.
This addendum to the unanswerable questions is when the Suns are ready to contend truly, what is their forward line going to look like? So Ben King, 71 goals for the season. Ethan Reid is on his journey. He was a mile away on Saturday night. They dropped Jed Walter to get their mix right late in the season. There are unanswerable questions around Charlie Curnow and Jamie Elliott. What is their I'm intrigued as to what their best forward setup's going to look like when they're ready to contend either next year or the year after.
Well, Reid is green and had some rolled gold opportunities to impose himself, but wasn't able to early in the match in particular. Farah's come in as the Walter replacement and played really well, but he's a journeyman type player, but was excellent for them. And King has stood up really well for the majority. If you can't say that his level's been anything else but high, but fell short when it mattered. So their forward line's sort of cobbled together. You put Humphrey in that mix, Ainsworth, who's been there for a long time. They've got some hurt fact. Ben Long obviously had a really strong season, but that's a cobbled together forward line when you look at it. But that's what good teams are. They're not all first round draft picks. They're teams that are moulded together to give those individuals the chance to play important roles to then go and execute and win finals. And that's exactly what the Suns did. They played great footy against the Dockers to only win by a point. So maybe there was a bit of a red flag in that. But I think that there's advantages that the Suns get, and their academy is one of them. And they've had a few come through there, but they're still really green. There's still a lot of growth to be found, and I think Dimmer's coached the ears off them, to be honest.
I agree with that.
And maybe that hadn't been accepted or believed, given the advantages that you think that they might have. But I think they really made the most of what they've got. So there's going to be work to do to make sure that they can go out that next step.
I think to get into contention next year, I think they would have to bring in one or two if they are a chance to get Charlie Curnow
in front of the ball.
And if Jamie Elliott truly does want to relocate his life there. So if those balls are in play, I would be looking to land those now. And I would trade a little bit of the future for Charlie Curnow, as I know some people don't want to do that. I would. And if that's Jed Walter, I reckon that's a great win-win. If I'm Carlton, I'm taking Jed Walter. And if I'm Gold Coast, I'm trying to fast track it from here.
If you did make that choice, you've got to make the choice based on, does he make our forward structure better? Like, does he make the job easier? And can we get greater hurt factor out of our second, third, and fourth targets? So does Ben King become better as a result of that? And I think on the outside, you'd say yes, he would, and yes, he does. But we'd love to see it, wouldn't we? As much as the Carlton people won't want to see the back of Charlie, it's movement's inevitable, and it seems like this trade period's going to be on for young. It
does feel that way. Jed Walter could be Josh Kennedy the other way.
Yes,
it makes them a really interesting commodity in the trade period because they could keep going on their natural progression, and I reckon they'll be short of contention next year, or they could try to fast track it and see if they can get themselves into it. Brisbane Lions got their response right, the way Chris Fagan, don't invent a crisis. Josh Dunkley and his attitude to go and shut out Matt Rowell, 18 tackles. Zorko goes straight to Miller. The champs steeled themselves.
They did, and they did remarkably well. I mean, thought, okay, they've got one more punch to throw, and they'll throw it, and then they might be a bit vulnerable the other side, but that does not look the case. I mean, Kai Loman's energy early, I thought, was first class. Like, get a haircut, do something a bit different, whether it's by accident or not. We've got Brownie on the hook. If the Lions win it, he's gonna get the number one and get a couple of trims in it, which I'd love to see. Let's all barrack for that. But yeah, Loman and Cameron was up and about. Like, their energy was huge. But the leaders, you're right, the leaders. Okay, I want him. Dunkley wants Rao, and Zorko says, I want Miller. Not because I want to niggle them, not because we're just here for shits and giggles. We're here to get the job done, and that's exactly what they did. Dunkley's performance was huge. Yep. Like, it's one thing saying that you need to do that to a player. Like, Rao asks a real question of every opposition. So it's one thing to say, we need to quell him and we need to combat his inside to outside game. But it's another to be able to have a player that can execute it, and two, have a structure that can get it done. And the Lions were able to do both. It was a phenomenal effort. Like, have you seen? We don't often see a performance like that.
So the champs have it in them, don't they? And I think that would have been a little bit of Chris Fagan. So he clearly knows how to show them when they put in a poor performance. He clearly knows this is what it looked like. Like it's you're experienced enough. You've got enough pride. This is what it looked like. Are we going to go and rectify this? And the only doubt would have been, were they physically and mentally still there for it? And were they ever?
But you could see that. You could see how free they were. So that's the psychology piece. So we haven't got. There's not something to lose here. We're not thinking about what the worst case scenario is. We're thinking about what the best case scenario is. So, and we'll focus on what we can do to get the result, rather than worrying about that thing that might pop up if we don't do the things that we need to do. So there's a distinct way of looking at it. It's blue sky thinking. It's opportunity. It's focus on strengths. This is what you've displayed over a long period of time. But then it's also the young blokes that come up. So Gallup, that's the best game of his career. Yeah. And he's looked up and about. He understands how important his role is. He's brought into the side because he's a really strong aerial player. So he goes and displays that aerial power, which we go, yeah, that's what he's got. But he was able to meet the moments and get the job done. Now Morris, there's so many weapons in that team. And like Rayners stands out, doesn't it? When he does what he does, he creates so many opportunities for his team, for his teammates, for himself. He's and there is a number one pick that's come through and travelled the hard road and stands up in big games. Now, he wasn't great last week or 2 weeks ago. The Lions fell short, but geez, they found a way, and how, with momentum now.
And they didn't have to redline it either. That game was over halfway through the third quarter, which I think is helpful for where they find themselves.
Where does the McInerney contribution sit, do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
You don't see, you didn't need to see it as much because there was energy everywhere. It wasn't just around him. But I've got no doubt that carries. I mean, absolutely no doubt, because they weren't expecting to get him back. His back issues, 2/3 through the year, were nearly to the point where this is probably it. But they've been able to find a way, and they've stayed with the problem long enough, and he has not given up on it, which is like that story in its own, sold by Fags to the group around resilience, around staying in the contest, around being able to put your best foot forward and then look after things you can control, and the rest looks after itself. But I think that his story alone would be one that you'd be leaning into really strongly. There's no guarantees what's going to happen over the next couple of weeks, but it would be another fairy tale story, would it not?
Put your 4 in any order you like.
Well, I actually haven't looked at it. We know who the 4 are, don't we?
Yep.
So I would suggest that the Cats are the biggest favourites. So I'm going to put them at 1. I'm going to tip Collingwood, so I'll put them at 2. The marginal game is the Collingwood-Brizzy game, so I'll put them at 3, and I'll put Hawks at 4. I think that Collingwood-Brisbane game is a legitimate coin toss, and I just think the Cats, a little bit rested, will be able to get the job done against the Hawks. But yeah, that's where I've looked.
Yep. I've gone 4 Collingwood, 3 Brisbane, 2 Hawthorn, 1 Geelong.
So you're tipping Geelong and Hawthorn?
I've got 1v2, 3v4. No, they can't win. But whose footy do I most like? I've got 1 Geelong, 2 Hawthorn, 3 Brisbane, 4 Collingwood.
So you've moved away from who's going to win the...
That's right. Whose footy do I most like right now?